We talk, but nothing changes. The simple spiritual shift that turns conversations into real connection. Written by Alpha Mishihiri, published by Kitabu Poa Publisher. Prologue. If you and I were sitting across from each other, not as strangers, but as two people who understand what it means to love, to struggle, to hope, and sometimes to question, I would begin here with honesty. Marriage, at its core, is not built on perfection. It is built on intention. For more than 28 years, I have been married to the same beautiful girl I once stood beside in a college cafeteria, surrounded by her friends, unaware of how much life would ask of us and how much love would require from us. Back then, what we had was simple. There was laughter, curiosity, and a quiet sense that something meaningful had begun. But what we could not yet see was the journey ahead, the moments that would test us, stretch us, and invite us into a deeper understanding of ourselves and each other. Looking back now, I can say this with clarity. Our marriage was not sustained by chance. It was shaped, refined, and strengthened by intention, especially in the moments when it would have been easier to drift apart. There were seasons when distractions grew louder than connection, seasons when the pressures of life, responsibility, and unmet expectations tried to pull our attention away from what truly mattered. And like many couples, we faced moments when distance seemed easier than closeness, when silence felt safer than conversation, and when misunderstanding quietly replaced harmony. But over time, something became clear to me, something simple, yet profoundly life-altering. Challenges are not the enemy, they are signals. Like traffic lights along a busy road, they are not placed there to frustrate us, but to guide us. Some moments ask us to slow down, to become aware, to observe what is happening within us. Others ask us to stop, to reflect, to pause before reacting in ways that deepen the very problem we are trying to solve. And then there are moments that invite us to move forward with clarity, courage, and renewed intention. For many years, I misunderstood these signals. I resisted them. I questioned them. At times, I even fought against them, believing that the discomfort itself was the problem. But wisdom, often born through experience rather than theory, taught me something different. You do not argue with a signal. You read it. You respond to it. And in doing so, you move forward with greater alignment. What transformed our marriage was not a single breakthrough moment, nor was it the result of external solutions. It was the gradual realization that the true work was happening within. It was learning to direct our inner conversations, the silent dialogue we carry about ourselves, about each other, and about our relationship, toward the outcome we truly desired rather than the frustration we were experiencing in the moment. This principle is not new, it is ancient. It is the same principle that guided Abraham as he walked by faith into what he could not yet see. It is the same truth Jesus taught when he pointed people inward, reminding them that transformation begins within before it is ever seen without. And it is the same revelation the Apostle Paul articulated when he spoke of the renewing of the mind as the pathway to a transformed life. What I discovered over these 28 years is that these were not abstract spiritual ideas meant for distant reflection. They were practical, living truths, principles that, when applied, quietly reshape the way you experience your relationship. I have seen what happens when these principles are ignored, and I have lived what becomes possible when they are embraced. There were moments in our journey when love felt distant, when the connection we once had seemed buried beneath layers of misunderstanding, fatigue, and unspoken expectations. And yet, through the consistent application of these inner shifts, something remarkable happened. The love we thought we were losing was not gone. It was simply waiting to be rediscovered through a different way of seeing, thinking, and responding. Today, I can say this with both gratitude and certainty. Our love is stronger than ever. Not because life became easier, but because we became more aligned. Not because challenges disappeared, but because we learned how to interpret them differently. And not because one of us changed the other, but because we each took responsibility for the conversation happening within. What you are about to read is not theory. It is not motivation designed to make you feel better for a moment. It is a distillation of lived experience, tested, refined, and proven not only in my own marriage, but in the lives of countless others across time. This wisdom has been present since the beginning. It has guided those who chose to listen, and it has remained available to anyone willing to look beyond appearances and engage with the deeper reality of how transformation actually occurs. Now, it is available to you, but I must say this clearly, not as a warning, but as an invitation to integrity. Reading these pages without applying what you learn will not change your life. Insight without action is simply information. It may inspire you for a moment, but it will not transform you. Transformation requires participation. It asks you to become aware of what is happening within you, to choose differently in moments where you once reacted automatically, and to align your inner dialogue with the outcome you truly desire, even when it feels unfamiliar at first. And if you choose to take that step, you will not walk alone. There is a growing community of individuals committed to the same path, people who are no longer satisfied with surface-level solutions, but are willing to engage in the deeper work that leads to lasting change. To join them is not simply to consume information, but to invest in a new way of being. If you are here, it is not by accident. Something within you recognizes that there is more love, more clarity, more connection than what you may be experiencing right now. And that recognition is the beginning. So, as you turn the page, I invite you to read not just with your eyes, but with your awareness. Let each idea meet you where you are. Let it challenge you where needed and comfort you where necessary. And most importantly, allow it to guide you back to the place where all meaningful change begins, within. Chapter 1. You did not enter love to feel like you were carrying bricks. You did not say yes to a relationship so you could spend your days bracing yourself for the next cold reply, the next strange silence, the next shift in tone, the next moment where something small turns heavy for no clear reason. You did not dream of marriage so you could sit in your own house and feel like a visitor. You did not long for companionship so you could feel alone in the presence of someone whose name once made your chest light up. And yet for many people, that is exactly what love starts to feel like. Heavy, not always dramatic, not always loud. Sometimes it is not even the fighting that wears you down. Sometimes it is the waiting, the guessing, the rehearsing, the way you go over a conversation in your head 10 times before saying one sentence out loud, the way you tell yourself, maybe tonight will be different. And then night comes, and it feels like every other night. Sometimes the weight is not in the words spoken. It is in the words swallowed. You know this weight if you have ever heard your spouse call your name and felt a knot in your stomach instead of warmth. You know this weight if you have ever sat in the car for a minute longer than necessary because going inside felt harder than staying out. You know this weight if you have ever found yourself thinking, how did we get here? While smiling through dinner, church, family gatherings, or pictures that make everything look fine from the outside. That private dread, that inner tightening, that habit of holding your breath before you speak is not a small thing. It steals peace quietly. It steals safety slowly. It steals joy in such a gradual way that many people do not notice how much has been taken until they can no longer remember what ease felt like. That is one of the hardest parts of relationship pain. It can become normal before it becomes unbearable. Human beings can get used to almost anything, not because it is good, but because it is familiar. A tense house can become familiar. A distant partner can become familiar. Feeling ignored can become familiar. Even confusion can become familiar. A person can adapt to a climate that is starving them and call it maturity. They can call it patience. They can call it loyalty. They can call it just how marriage is. But naming a prison does not make it freedom. What often makes love feel like labor is not only what is happening between two people, it is what begins happening inside one of them. This is where many people miss the turning point. They spend months, even years, trying to solve the relationship by managing behavior on the outside while never noticing the conversation growing stronger on the inside. That conversation sounds simple at first. He never listens. She does not respect me. I am always the one trying. Nothing changes. Maybe this is all I get. Maybe I waited too long. Maybe I chose wrong. Maybe I am too much. Maybe I am not enough. At first, these sound like thoughts, just thoughts, small conclusions, reactions to events. But thoughts do not stay still. A thought repeated long enough becomes a feeling. A feeling repeated long enough becomes a lens. A lens repeated long enough becomes behavior. And behavior repeated long enough becomes the life you call normal. This is why love can feel heavy even when nothing huge is happening in the moment. The heaviness may not be in the room first. It may be in the meaning you have been carrying into the room. A woman can hear, "I'm tired," and feel rejected, because inside she has already been telling herself, "He does not want me." A man can hear, "Can we talk later?" and feel dishonored, because inside he has already been telling himself, "My voice doesn't matter here." The outside moment matters, yes, but the inside meaning often weighs more. One sentence lands on the story already running within. This is not to blame, it is power. There is a difference. Blame says, "This is your fault." Power says, "This can change." Many people have never been taught that difference. So the moment they hear that something within them is at the root of their pain, they feel accused. But this chapter is not accusing you. It is returning something to you. If everything depends on another person changing first, then your peace has been placed in the hands you do not control. That is a frightening way to live. It turns every day into an emotional waiting game. It makes you a hostage to someone else's mood, language, timing, awareness, healing, or lack of it. But if part of what you are living is being sustained by the conversation within you, then change becomes possible before permission arrives from the outside. That matters more than most people know. There is a line in scripture that has unsettled and liberated me in equal measure. It is not what goes into a person that defiles them, but what comes out. In your source material, that line shows that what sustains unhappiness in a marriage is not finally the spouse, the in-laws, or the circumstances, but what is happening within. It reframes defilement not as religious dirtiness, but as that inner condition of feeling unlike yourself, uneasy, agitated, joyless, displaced. That is a hard truth if you are used to locating the whole problem outside of you. But it is also good news, because if what comes out of you is shaping your experience, then you are not as powerless as you have been feeling. And many people are feeling powerless. They are tired of trying to say the right thing, tired of carrying the emotional temperature of the relationship, tired of praying, hoping, adjusting, waiting, softening, trying not to trigger, trying not to overreact, trying not to shut down, tired of speaking and feeling unheard, tired of staying quiet and feeling invisible, tired of performing peace while living with pressure. Not long ago, I came across a late night thread under a relationship post. It was one of those posts people comment on when they are too tired to pretend. A woman named Melissa wrote from Grand Rapids, Michigan. Her profile picture showed a soft smile, but her words had no softness left in them. She said, "People always say forgive and move on. That sounds nice until you're the one who got lied to, cheated on, and blamed for it." Another woman replied from a small town outside Dayton, Ohio. "We don't even fight much anymore. I just don't say what I feel because I already know how it ends." That second line is where many relationships begin to suffocate. Not in an explosion in retreat, not in rage first, in rehearsal. A person begins practicing conversations in their mind rather than having them in life. They imagine tone, they prepare for disappointment, they try to reduce damage before anything happens. Their body learns tension before their mouth opens. Their nervous system begins to respond to memory as if it were the present. This is not a weakness, it is conditioning. The brain is built to predict. If a certain kind of pain has happened enough times, the mind starts getting there before the moment does. It tries to protect you by preparing you. But the same system that protects can also trap. If your inner world keeps preparing for hurt, it becomes hard to enter love openly, even when part of you still wants it. So love begins to feel like labor, not because love itself is meant to be hard, but because you are trying to carry intimacy through an identity shaped by tension. That is exhausting. It is exhausting to want closeness while expecting disappointment. Exhausting to long for tenderness while practicing defense. Exhausting to desire connection while feeding thoughts that keep you guarded. You can love someone and still be internally trained against peace with them. You can stay committed and still be mentally preparing for pain. You can remain present in the relationship while disappearing inside yourself. And when that happens long enough, people start mistaking survival for love. They call tolerance love. They call silence wisdom. They call it shrinking peace. They call overthinking discernment. They call emotional numbness maturity. But a relationship cannot become light while the person living it has made heaviness their home. This is where a gentler truth must be spoken. The pain you feel may be real, but it is not always meant to become your identity. The loneliness may be real, but it is not a prophecy. The tension may be real, but it is not the final truth about what is available to you. A strained season can become a teacher, but it should not become your name. This is why hunger matters. Every relationship struggle contains a hunger underneath it, a hunger to be seen, a hunger to be safe, a hunger to be chosen, a hunger to be heard, a hunger to rest, a hunger to laugh again, a hunger to stop surviving each conversation and start inhabiting it. Hunger is not the enemy. Hunger is the evidence that something in you still knows there is more than this. You do not hunger for what has no meaning to you. If you hunger for peace, peace matters to you. If you hunger for affection, affection matters to you. If you hunger for ease, your soul remembers ease belongs somewhere in the picture. This is why your discomfort is not just a burden, it is information. It tells you that something in your present experience does not match what your deeper being knows is possible. Pain is often the alarm, not the destination. It is the signal that something needs to be seen clearly. And that is where this journey begins. Not with fixing your spouse, not with controlling every outcome, not with becoming fake positive, not with pretending everything is beautiful when it is not. It begins with recognition. The kind of recognition that can sit in a room with truth and not run from it. The kind that can say, something in me has been rehearsing what I do not want. The kind that can notice, I have been letting certain thoughts live here without questioning them. The kind that can admit, I have normalized a climate that does not match the life I say I desire. Recognition is not condemnation. It is the first clean breath after a long time underwater. Many people skip this because they want immediate relief. But relief without recognition rarely lasts. If you numb the symptom without seeing the pattern, The pattern simply changes clothes and returns. That is why people can have one good talk and still feel no real shift. One apology does not erase an inner climate. One nice weekend does not undo a practiced identity. A few better moments cannot hold if the private conversation remains untouched. What makes this chapter hopeful is not the claim that everything changes overnight. It is the deeper claim that heaviness is not your only possible way of relating. There is another way to live. There is a way to enter a conversation without carrying yesterday's script. There is a way to feel your own presence again. There is a way to stop feeding the very atmosphere that keeps suffocating you. There is a way to love without labor, but it does not begin by trying harder on the outside. It begins by seeing more honestly on the inside. That is why I want to ask you a question that is simple enough to miss and strong enough to shift your whole direction. What has been living in you? Not what has been happening around you first, not what they said first, not what they failed to do first. What has been living in you? What sentence has been repeating? What fear has been rehearsing? What expectation has been feeding your tone? What private belief has been coloring every exchange? What have you been calling normal that is actually starving you? Do not rush past those questions. Your life will often follow what your mouth never says out loud. And that is why this chapter matters. You do not need to solve the whole relationship tonight. You do not need to force a breakthrough by morning. You do not need to have perfect language, perfect faith, or perfect emotional control. But you do need honesty, gentle honesty, grounded honesty. The kind that does not shame you for where you are, but also does not let you keep calling a heavy thing light. Love is too sacred to keep dragging through an inner world full of rehearsed defeat. You deserve to feel your own life again. You deserve to feel your own voice again. You deserve to sit with yourself and not hear only fear, blame, memory, and dread. You deserve to become someone who can recognize what is happening within and choose more carefully what remains there. That is the first doorway. Not performance, not pressure, recognition. And once you recognize what has been filling the room within you, the room can begin to change. Mission possible. Before the next 24 hours end, give yourself 2 quiet minutes. Sit somewhere simple. In your car before going inside, on the edge of the bed, at the kitchen table before anyone wakes up, in the bathroom, if that is the only place you can hear your own thoughts. Then ask yourself one question. What am I feeling most often in this relationship right now? Do not write a paragraph. Do not explain it. Do not defend it. Do not make a case for it. Just name it. Lonely, angry, unseen, tired, rejected, anxious, numb, heavy. Then look at the word you wrote and say quietly and honestly, I see you. That is all. The result to notice is not immediate happiness, it is clarity, a little more space, a little less fog, a small moment where you stop drowning in the feeling long enough to recognize it. And when you do acknowledge it, that matters. Tell yourself, I did not run, I noticed. That is not small. That is how change begins. Chapter 2. The question that changes everything. There is a moment in every life when something within grows still enough to be heard. It does not shout, it does not demand, it simply waits, quiet, patient, and persistent until you are ready to listen. It often appears in ordinary moments when nothing seems outwardly wrong, yet something feels unsettled beneath the surface. You may be sitting beside the person you love, sharing the same space, yet sensing a distance that cannot be explained. And in that subtle tension, a question begins to form. Not a question directed outward, but inward. Scripture captures this moment with striking simplicity. In Genesis, we encounter a question that appears almost casual at first glance. Why are you standing around? It reads like a practical inquiry, perhaps even a mild rebuke. Yet when you pause and listen more deeply, it reveals itself as something far more profound. It is not merely a question of behavior. It is a question of awareness. It is not asking others what they are doing. It is asking you what you are experiencing. This is where the shift begins. Most people are trained to question circumstances. They ask why someone behaves a certain way, why situations unfold as they do, or why life feels unfair. These questions feel justified, even necessary, yet they keep attention anchored outside, focused on what cannot be controlled. Over time, this outward focus weakens clarity. It creates a subtle dependency, where peace becomes tied to the actions of others. But the question that changes everything does not look outward. It turns inward. You are not questioning people. You are questioning what you are feeling. This distinction is simple yet transformative. When something stirs within you, loneliness, frustration, the quiet ache of feeling unseen, your instinct may be to trace it back to someone else's action. Yet what if, instead of assigning meaning externally, you pause long enough to notice the feeling itself? This is where power begins. Because the moment you recognize what you are feeling, you interrupt the automatic cycle of reaction. You step out of blame and into awareness. You shift from being carried by the moment to becoming conscious within it. The experience may not change immediately, but your relationship to it does, and that is where transformation takes root. Consider how quickly a moment can unfold. A message is delayed, a tone feels distant, a response seems indifferent. In an instant, the mind begins to interpret, to explain, to construct a story. Yet beneath the story is always a feeling, and that feeling, left unnoticed, becomes the driver of your reaction. But when you ask a different question, when you pause and gently inquire, what am I feeling right now? Something subtle yet powerful occurs. You interrupt the pattern. Neuroscience offers language for what is happening in that moment. When an emotion is unnamed, it tends to dominate the mind, pulling attention into reactivity. But when you name it, even in a single word, the brain begins to shift. The emotional intensity softens. Awareness increases. You move from being immersed in the experience to observing it. This shift, though small, creates space. And in that space, choice becomes possible. You are no longer reacting automatically. You are seeing. Over time, this practice reveals something even deeper. You begin to notice that what feels like a single moment is often part of a larger pattern. The feeling you experience today echoes something familiar. It has appeared before, perhaps in different circumstances, perhaps with different people, but with the same emotional tone. What once seemed isolated begins to reveal itself as consistent. And in that realization, something important emerges. You are not dealing with a moment. You are encountering a pattern. This understanding is not meant to create pressure or blame. It is not an invitation to criticize yourself or to assume responsibility for everything that happens. Rather, it is an invitation into clarity. It allows you to see that your experience is shaped not only by external events, but by the internal lens through which those events are perceived. When you can see that clearly, you are no longer powerless. You are present. And presence changes how you respond. Instead of reacting impulsively, you begin to engage consciously. Instead of being carried by emotion, you learn to observe it. Instead of trying to fix everything at once, you start by understanding what is happening within you. This is not a rejection of action, but a refinement of it. It ensures that what you do next is grounded in clarity rather than reaction. This is the beginning of a different way of living. Not perfect, but aware. Not forced, but intentional. The question that changes everything is not complicated. It does not require training or preparation. It simply requires willingness. The next time you feel triggered, instead of moving immediately into response, allow yourself a brief pause. In that pause, ask quietly, what am I feeling right now? Then name it. One word is enough. In that moment, something meaningful has already happened. You have shifted from reaction to awareness. You have chosen to notice rather than to be carried. And that alone is worth acknowledging. It may seem small, almost insignificant, but it is not. It is the foundation of change. And so when you recognize that moment, when you pause, notice, and name what is present within you, take a second to honor it. Let the recognition be simple and sincere. You did not react, you became aware. That is how transformation begins. Not in grand gestures, but in quiet moments of clarity. And from those moments, a new way of experiencing love starts to emerge. Chapter 3. The real problem and why that changes everything. There are moments in life that do not announce themselves as problems, yet carry a quiet weight that is difficult to ignore. You may find yourself in the same room with the person you love, engaged in the same routines and daily exchanges, yet still feel a subtle disconnection that cannot easily be explained. Nothing appears broken on the surface, yet something within feels unsettled. It is in these moments that a quiet realization begins to form, often unspoken but deeply felt. This is not what it was meant to feel like. This realization does not emerge from nowhere. It is shaped over time through repeated experiences, small interpretations, and quiet conclusions that begin to take root within the mind. What initially feels like a passing thought gradually becomes a pattern of perception. You begin to form simple explanations. Perhaps that your partner has changed, that effort is no longer mutual, or that things simply do not improve. These interpretations, though subtle, begin to influence how you experience every interaction. Over time, they no longer feel like thoughts, they feel like truth. As this internal narrative strengthens, something shifts in the way you engage. You are no longer responding solely to what is happening in the present moment. Instead, you are responding to what you expect will happen based on what you have already concluded. This transition is often unnoticed, yet it changes everything. Your tone becomes more guarded, your response is more measured, your openness more restrained. These changes are not deliberate decisions, but natural extensions of the story that has been forming within you. It is important to pause here because this is where a deeper understanding begins. What you are experiencing is not only your relationship as it exists externally, but your interpretation of that relationship as it is processed internally. This distinction is subtle but powerful. It does not dismiss what is happening around you, nor does it place blame upon you. Rather, it reveals that your experience is shaped not just by events, but by the meaning you consistently assign to them. There is a principle echoed across both psychological understanding and ancient wisdom that what is within inevitably shapes what is expressed outwardly. This is not an occasional occurrence, it is a consistent process. Your internal dialogue, your repeated thoughts, and your underlying beliefs quietly influence how you perceive, respond, and engage. As a result, your experience is not only created by what happens, but sustained by how you interpret what happens. Consider a simple moment. Your partner arrives home later than expected and offers a brief explanation. The situation itself is neutral, yet your experience of it is not, if your internal narrative has been shaped by the thought that you are not a priority. That moment will feel like confirmation. Your reaction will not arise solely from the event, but from the meaning already established within you. The tone you carry, the posture you assume, and the words you choose will all reflect what has been quietly rehearsed internally. This is where many people identify the moment as the problem. They focus on the action, the words, or the situation, and conclude that this is where everything began. However, what is often overlooked is that the moment is not the origin, it is the continuation. The origin lies in repeated thoughts, accumulated meanings, and internal patterns that have been forming over time. Yet within this realization lies a profound shift. If your experience is sustained from within, then it is also accessible from within. This does not suggest that external circumstances are irrelevant, nor does it imply that responsibility rests entirely on you. Rather, it reveals a dimension of your experience within your reach, something you can observe, understand, and gradually reshape. This shift begins with awareness. It begins by noticing what has been quietly repeating within you. When you slow down and turn your attention inward, you may begin to uncover the feelings beneath your reactions. What initially appears as frustration may reveal itself as a sense of being unseen. What feels like irritation may be rooted in a deeper perception of not being valued. These underlying feelings, once recognized, provide clarity that was previously hidden beneath automatic responses. As you remain present with these feelings, something begins to change. You start to separate what is happening from what you are telling yourself about it. This separation creates space, a subtle but meaningful distance between stimulus and response. Within that space, awareness grows. And with awareness comes the possibility of choice. This does not mean that emotions disappear or that reactions cease entirely. It means that you begin to recognize them earlier. You begin to pause sooner. You begin to see more clearly. These shifts may feel small, almost imperceptible at first, but they carry a significant impact over time. They alter the way you participate in your relationship, not by force, but by clarity. There is another dimension to this process that is equally important to understand. The mind naturally seeks to confirm what it believes. When a particular thought is repeated consistently, the brain begins to look for evidence that supports it. This is not a flaw, but a function of how perception operates. As a result, if you have been telling yourself that you are not valued, you will begin to notice moments that reinforce that belief, while overlooking those that do not. Once this mechanism is recognized, its influence begins to soften. You are no longer unconsciously guided by it. Instead, you become aware of the lens through which you are seeing. And this awareness allows for a different experience to emerge. It explains why two people can exist in the same circumstances and yet perceive them entirely differently. Their experiences are not determined solely by what is happening, but by how they interpret it. The real problem then is not confined to the external interaction. It is found in the internal patterns that have been forming quietly over time, the meanings assigned, the expectations developed, and the emotional responses repeated. Yet this understanding carries with it a sense of possibility. What has been formed can be reformed. What has been repeated can be interrupted. What has been practiced can be replaced. This is not a call to force change or to suppress thought. It is an invitation to see more clearly. Because once you see what has been operating within you, it becomes difficult to remain unaware of it. And once awareness is established, change becomes not only possible, but natural. As this awareness deepens, something begins to shift in your experience. Moments that once triggered immediate reactions begin to feel different. There is a pause where there was once urgency. There is clarity where there was once confusion. The emotional weight that once felt constant begins to lighten. Not because everything outside has changed, but because something within is no longer carrying the same burden. This is how transformation begins. Not through force or pressure, but through awareness. It unfolds gradually, through small shifts in perception and response. You begin to notice more. You begin to understand more. And as understanding grows, so does your ability to engage differently. You come to recognize a simple yet profound truth. You are not merely experiencing your relationship. You are participating in how it feels. This participation is not a limitation, but a source of power. It means that while you may not control every circumstance, you are not without influence over your experience. There is nothing wrong with desiring growth, improvement, or change within your relationship. These desires are natural and valid. However, while those external changes unfold, you are not required to remain passive. You can begin where you are by turning your attention inward and observing what is present within you. Because the moment you begin to understand your internal experience, you move from unconscious reaction to conscious participation. And it is within that participation that real change begins. Not all at once, but steadily, meaningfully, and undeniably. And that is where everything begins to shift. Chapter 4. The inner conversation that shapes everything. A conversation is happening within you at all times. It does not require effort. It does not wait for permission. It continues quietly, shaping how you see, how you feel, and how you respond. Most of the time, you are not even aware that it is there. Yet it is present in every moment, interpreting your experience before you consciously engage with it. This inner conversation is not merely a reflection of your thoughts. It is the framework through which your reality is filtered. It assigns meaning to events, provides context for interactions, and shapes the emotional tone of your experiences. Long before words are spoken outwardly, something has already been said inwardly. And what is said within you matters. It matters more than tone. It matters more than timing. It matters more than technique. Because what is happening inside you becomes the foundation of what eventually appears outside you. You may believe that your relationship is shaped primarily by communication between two people. Yet beneath every external exchange is an internal dialogue that precedes it. Before you respond, you have already interpreted. Before you speak, you have already concluded. Before you engage, you have already felt. This is where most people overlook the true origin of their experience. They focus on what is said between them, while remaining unaware of what is being repeated within them. Consider how quickly this unfolds. A simple interaction occurs. A word is spoken, a tone is perceived, or an action is taken. Instantly, your inner conversation begins. It may sound like a quiet observation, a subtle assumption, or a familiar conclusion. In that moment, you are no longer just experiencing what is happening. You are experiencing what you are telling yourself about what is happening. And that distinction changes everything. Because your response is not formed by the event alone. It is shaped by the meaning you assign to it internally. That meaning becomes the lens through which you interpret not only that moment, but often the moments that follow. Over time, this inner dialogue becomes patterned. It develops consistency. It begins to repeat familiar themes, often without your conscious awareness. These patterns feel natural because they have been practiced repeatedly. They do not feel like choices, they feel like truth, yet they are not fixed. They are formed, and what is formed can be reshaped. There is a principle that has been expressed across generations, both in ancient wisdom and modern understanding. It is the recognition that what is held within consciousness eventually expresses itself in experience. This is not a mystical idea, but a practical reality. Your internal focus directs your attention, and your attention determines what you notice, emphasize, and respond to. In neuroscience, this process is often described through attentional bias and neural reinforcement. The brain strengthens what is repeatedly focused upon. Thoughts that are rehearsed become more accessible. Emotional patterns that are revisited become more familiar. Over time, this creates a cycle where what you consistently think and feel becomes the dominant way you experience life. In simpler terms, what you keep saying within yourself becomes easier to believe, and what you believe begins to shape what you see. This is why two people can encounter the same situation and experience it differently. The difference does not lie in the event itself, but in the internal conversation that interprets it. One person may see distance while another sees space. One may feel rejection while another perceives neutrality. The external moment is the same, yet the internal dialogue creates entirely different experiences. This understanding does not dismiss the reality of what is happening around you. It does not deny that actions, words, and behaviors have impact. Rather, it reveals that your experience of those things is filtered through something deeper, your inner conversation. And once you begin to see this, a new possibility emerges. You are no longer limited to reacting to what happens. You can begin to observe what is being said within you. At first, this observation may feel subtle. The inner conversation moves quickly, often blending seamlessly with your perception of reality. But with attention, it becomes more visible. You begin to notice the phrases that repeat, the assumptions that arise, the interpretations that feel automatic. You begin to hear what you have been telling yourself. This awareness is not meant to create judgment. It is not about labeling thoughts as right or wrong. It is about seeing clearly. Because once you can see what is happening within you, you are no longer unconsciously driven by it. You become present to it, and presence creates space. Within that space, something important happens. You are no longer fully identified with the thought. You can recognize it as something occurring within you, rather than something that defines you. This subtle distinction shifts your relationship to your own mind. Instead of being carried by your inner dialogue, you begin to witness it. And in that witnessing, a new form of participation becomes possible. You may notice that a familiar thought arises in a moment of tension. Perhaps it suggests that you are not being valued or that the situation will not improve. Previously, this thought may have gone unquestioned, immediately shaping your emotional response. Now, however you see it, you recognize it, and in that recognition, you are no longer bound to follow it automatically. This does not mean the thought disappears. It means you are no longer unaware of it, and that awareness changes how it influences you. The emotional intensity may soften. The urgency to react may lessen. The moment becomes less about proving the thought right and more about understanding what is happening within you. This is where transformation begins to take shape, not through force, but through clarity. Not through suppression, but through awareness. As you continue to observe your inner conversation, you may begin to notice patterns that extend beyond individual moments. Certain themes may repeat themselves. Certain interpretations may appear across different situations. These patterns are not random. They are reflections of what has been practiced internally over time. And as you see them, you begin to understand something deeper. Your experience is not being created in isolated moments. It is being shaped continuously by what you rehearse within yourself. This realization is not meant to overwhelm you. It is meant to empower you. Because if your inner conversation has been shaping your experience, then shifting that conversation changes the direction of that experience, not instantly, but progressively. The shift begins with awareness and continues through intentional attention. You begin to guide your focus more consciously. You become selective about what you reinforce internally. Instead of allowing every thought to define your experience, you begin to align your attention with what you want to cultivate. This is not about pretending that everything is perfect. It is about choosing what you nurture within yourself. It is about recognizing that your internal dialogue is not fixed but fluid. It can be redirected, refined, and reshaped over time. As this process unfolds, you may notice subtle changes in how you experience your relationship. Moments that once felt heavy may feel lighter. Interactions that once triggered immediate reactions may now include a pause. That pause, though brief, represents a shift from automatic living to conscious engagement. And that shift changes everything. Because in that space, you are no longer reacting from habit. You are responding with awareness. You are no longer being carried by an unconscious pattern. You are participating in the moment with clarity. This is the beginning of a different way of relating, not only to another person, but to yourself. You begin to understand that the quality of your relationship is influenced not only by what is exchanged outwardly, but by what is cultivated inwardly. And as you continue to refine that inner conversation, something meaningful begins to emerge. A sense of steadiness, a sense of clarity, a sense that you are no longer navigating blindly, but with awareness. You come to recognize that love is not only expressed through actions and words, but through the internal state from which those actions and words arise. When your inner conversation becomes aligned with what you desire to experience, your external interactions begin to reflect that alignment, not perfectly, but consistently. This is not about achieving a final state where everything is resolved. It is about developing a way of engaging that is grounded, aware, and intentional. It is about recognizing that transformation does not begin with changing another person, but with understanding the conversation that is already shaping your experience. And once you understand that, you are no longer reacting unconsciously. You are participating consciously. And in that participation, something new becomes possible. Not by force, but by alignment. Not by control, but by awareness. And that is where the experience of love begins to change, from within outward. Chapter 5. Becoming the source of what you seek. There comes a point in every journey where awareness alone is no longer enough. You begin to see your patterns. You recognize your inner conversations. You notice how your interpretations shape your experience. And while this awareness brings clarity, it also introduces a new question, one that is both empowering and confronting. If I can see what's happening within me, what do I do with it now? This is where many people hesitate. Because awareness reveals responsibility, not in a way that blames, but in a way that invites participation. It shows you that while you may not control everything around you, you are no longer disconnected from how your experience is being formed. And that realization leads to a deeper truth. What you seek in your relationship must first become alive within you. This is not a concept rooted in effort or performance. It is rooted in identity. Scripture speaks to this with remarkable clarity. Jesus, in his teaching, did not direct attention outward first. He consistently pointed inward. The kingdom of God is within you. Luke 17:21. This was not a poetic metaphor. It was a precise instruction. What you desire to experience externally must first be recognized internally. This is where the shift becomes practical. If you are longing to feel loved, seen, valued, or understood, the instinct is often to look for those experiences through another person's actions. Yet what this principle reveals is that the experience itself is not initiated externally. It is recognized and cultivated internally. This is where many people misunderstand the process. They assume that becoming the source of what they seek means ignoring reality or pretending that everything is fine. But that is not what this is. It is not denial. It is alignment. It is the decision to stop waiting for an external condition to give you permission to feel what is already available within you. The Apostle Paul expressed this transformation in a way that is both simple and profound. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Romans 12:2. He did not say to wait for circumstances to change. He did not say to depend on others to initiate transformation. He pointed directly to the mind, the inner environment where experience is shaped. This renewal is not about adapting new information alone. It is about embodying a new way of seeing. When you begin to renew your mind, you begin to shift your internal posture. You are no longer approaching your relationship from a place of lack, hoping to receive something you feel is missing. Instead, you begin to embody the very qualities you desire to experience. This is where the principle becomes lived. If you desire peace, you begin to cultivate peace within your own awareness. If you desire understanding, you begin by becoming more present and attentive in your own responses. If you desire connection, you begin by engaging from a place of openness rather than guarded expectation. This is not about perfection, it is about direction. And as this direction becomes consistent, something begins to change, not only within you, but around you. Because what you embody influences what you express. And what you express shapes how others experience you. This is why Proverbs teaches, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Proverbs 23:7. The emphasis is not on external identity, but internal formation. What is held within eventually becomes visible without. Let's bring this into a moment that may feel familiar. You are in a conversation that begins to shift in tone. Perhaps something is said that feels dismissive or disconnected. In the past, this may have triggered an immediate reaction, defensiveness, withdrawal, or frustration. But now, with awareness, something different becomes possible. You notice the feeling. You recognize the internal conversation beginning to form. And instead of allowing it to guide you unconsciously, you pause. In that pause, you have a choice. Not to control the other person, but to choose how you will show up. This is where becoming the source begins. You ask yourself, not outwardly but inwardly, what do I want to experience in this moment? If the answer is peace, align your response with it. If the answer is understanding, you listen more deeply. If the answer is connection, you speak from clarity rather than reaction. This may seem subtle, but it is powerful because you are no longer responding to what you lack. You are responding from what you are choosing to embody. And over time, this changes the dynamic of the interaction. Not because you are forcing change, but because you are introducing a different energy into the moment. This is what Jesus demonstrated consistently. He did not mirror the condition around him. He embodied the condition he desired to reveal. When faced with tension, he responded with clarity. When met with resistance, he remained grounded. His response was not determined by the moment. It was determined by his state of being. This is the same principle available to you. Not as something distant or unattainable, but as something practical and present. As you begin to live this way, you may notice something unexpected. The need to control or fix the other person begins to soften. The urgency to change external circumstances begins to lessen. This does not mean you stop caring or desiring growth. It means your foundation is no longer dependent on external validation. You become steady. And that steadiness creates space. Space for clearer communication. Space for more authentic interaction. Space for something new to emerge. This is where many people begin to see a shift in their relationship. Not because the other person suddenly changes, but because the dynamic itself begins to evolve. When one person shows up differently, the interaction cannot remain exactly the same. This is not about manipulation. It is about alignment. And alignment carries influence. The more consistent you become in embodying what you seek, the more natural this way of being becomes. It no longer feels like something you are trying to do. It becomes who you choose to be. And from that place, your actions, your words, and your presence begin to reflect that identity. This is why the principle is both simple and profound. You do not become the source of what you seek by waiting. You become it by practicing, by returning again and again to the awareness that what you desire is not separate from you. It is accessible within you. And as you access it, you begin to experience it. Not perfectly, but progressively. There is a moment in this journey where something settles within you. You realize that you are no longer chasing an experience. You are cultivating it. You are no longer waiting for love to appear. You are allowing it to be expressed through you. And in that realization, something shifts. You move from dependence to participation, from reaction to intention, from seeking to embodying. This is where the experience of love becomes lighter. Not because everything outside has changed, but because something within is no longer waiting to begin. And from that place, what once felt distant begins to feel possible again, not by force, but by becoming. Chapter 6. Practice that makes it real. There is a quiet but decisive shift when understanding begins to move into application. Up to this point, you have seen clearly. You have recognized the patterns within your thoughts, the meaning behind your feelings, and the influence of your inner conversation. You have begun to understand that your experience is not merely happening to you, it is being shaped within you. Yet there comes a moment when understanding alone no longer feels sufficient. You begin to sense that insight, no matter how clear, must be lived if it is to produce lasting change. And this is where the journey deepens, because transformation is not secured in what you know. It is established in what you practice. The Apostle Paul expressed this truth with clarity when he wrote, "Those things which you have both learned and received and heard and seen in me, do, and the God of peace shall be with you. Philippians 4:9. The emphasis is unmistakable. What has been learned must now be put into practice. Not once, not occasionally, but consistently. For it is in the doing that understanding becomes embodied. This is the stage where many hesitate, not because they lack insight, but because they underestimate the power of repetition. They assume that once something is understood, it should naturally remain. Yet the mind does not transform through exposure alone. It transforms through reinforcement. What is repeated becomes familiar. What is familiar becomes natural. What becomes natural begins to define your experience. This is why the practice matters. The space between awareness and identity. There is a pattern reflected throughout Scripture that reveals this stage of transformation with remarkable precision. It is the space between knowing and becoming, a space where truth has been revealed yet not fully embodied. The journey of Israel offers a clear illustration. They had been delivered from bondage. The external condition had changed, yet internally the patterns of captivity remained. Their thoughts, their fears, and their expectations continued to reflect what they had known for years. Freedom had been given, but it had not yet been practiced. And so they entered the wilderness, not as punishment, but as preparation. A place where what had been revealed could be rehearsed until it became natural. A place where identity could catch up with revelation. This same pattern unfolds within you. You may recognize that your experience is shaped from within. You may begin to observe your inner conversation and even interrupt it in moments. Yet the familiar patterns still return, not because the truth is absent, but because the practice is not yet consistent. This is not failure, it is formation. A conversation within the program. In one of our sessions, a woman shared something that captured this stage perfectly. She said, "I understand everything we've been talking about. I can see it when it's happening. But in the moment, it still feels like I get pulled back into the same reaction." There was no frustration in her voice, only honesty. And what she was describing is what most people experience at this point. The awareness is present, but the pattern still feels strong. The understanding is clear, but the response has not yet fully aligned with it. So we slowed the moment down together. I asked her to walk me through what happened the last time she felt triggered. As she spoke, it became clear that she had recognized the feeling, but only after the reaction had already begun. The awareness was there, but it was slightly delayed. And then something shifted as we continued the conversation. She realized that even though she had reacted, she had also recovered more quickly than before. She had noticed the pattern sooner. She had become aware within the moment rather than long after it. That may seem small, but it is not, because that is how transformation unfolds. Not in immediate perfection, but in progressive awareness. Not in the absence of reaction, but in the shortening of its duration. This is what practice produces, renewing the mind through repetition. Scripture does not speak of transformation as a single event. It speaks of it as a continual process. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Romans 12:2. The language itself reveals the method. Renewal is not a one-time occurrence. It is sustained through repetition. This aligns directly with how the mind functions. Neural pathways strengthen through repeated use. Emotional responses become conditioned through consistent reinforcement. What you return to repeatedly becomes easier to access. This is why what you practice matters more than what you understand. If you consistently return to old interpretations, they will remain dominant. If you intentionally return to a new way of seeing, that will begin to take root. Jesus pointed to this same principle when he said, "Abide in me and I in you." John 15:4. The word abide implies continuity. It speaks of remaining, staying, dwelling. Transformation is not found in occasional connection, but in sustained alignment. To abide is to return again and again until what once required effort becomes natural. The practice of returning. There was a moment in my own journey that brought this truth into focus in a way I could not ignore. It was not during a major conflict or a defining crisis. It was during an ordinary interaction that a subtle tension emerged. Something in the exchange felt slightly off, not enough to cause concern, but enough to stir a familiar feeling. In that moment, I could sense the old pattern attempting to surface. The interpretation was ready, the reaction was close behind. And for a brief second, I felt the pull to respond from that place, but something had changed. I noticed it, not afterward, not in reflection, but in real time. And in that awareness, I paused. The situation itself had not changed. The feeling was still present, but I was no longer fully identified with it. I could see it without being carried by it. So, instead of reacting from the old pattern, I returned to what I had been practicing. I chose presence. I chose clarity. I chose to respond from the state I desired to experience, not the one that had been conditioned. It was not dramatic. It was not perfect, but it was different. And that difference mattered because every time you return to alignment, you reinforce a new pattern when progress feels invisible. There will be moments when it seems as though nothing is changing. Moments when the external experience appears unchanged and the internal effort feels unnoticed. This is where many people become discouraged, not because they are not progressing, but because they are measuring transformation by immediate outcomes rather than internal shifts. Yet transformation rarely announces itself outwardly at first. It begins internally in ways that are often subtle. It shows up in how quickly you recognize a pattern. How often do you pause before reacting? In how much awareness you carry within the moment. These changes may not be immediately visible to others, but they are significant because they indicate that something within you is stabilizing. And once that stability is established, external shifts begin to follow. Not through force, but through alignment. Galatians reminds us, let us not grow weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. Galatians 6:9. This is not a promise of immediate results. It is a reminder of the nature of growth. What is practiced consistently will produce fruit, becoming through practice. There is a truth that brings this chapter into focus. You do not become what you occasionally understand. You become what you consistently practice. This is where the journey becomes personal. Not in theory, but in application. Not in concept, but in repetition. Each time you pause, you strengthen awareness. Each time you return, you reinforce alignment. Each time you choose differently, you reshape your experience. Over time, these moments accumulate. What once required effort becomes familiar. What was once unfamiliar becomes natural. And eventually, what you have been practicing becomes who you are. This is where love begins to feel lighter. Not because every situation changes immediately, but because you are no longer meeting those situations from the same place. You are meeting them with awareness, with intention, with consistency. And that changes everything. Not all at once, but in a way that lasts. Chapter 7. The shift that others begin to feel. When change stops being internal only. There comes a moment in this journey when something begins to move beyond you. Up to this point, the work has been deeply personal. You have learned to observe your thoughts, to recognize your feelings, to interrupt patterns, and to return again and again to a more aligned way of being. Much of this work has been internal, often unseen, sometimes even unnoticed by those around you. But transformation does not remain hidden forever. What is practiced within eventually expresses itself without. This is not because you are trying to influence others, but because your presence itself begins to change. The way you respond, the way you listen, the way you engage, these subtle shifts begin to alter the experience of the relationship itself. And this is where many people are surprised. Because the question quietly emerges: what happens when I change but they don't? It is a valid question, one that deserves an honest answer. But what you are about to discover is that change, when it is genuine and sustained, rarely exists in isolation. The law of expression. Scripture reveals a principle that is both simple and profound. Jesus said, "A good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit, neither can a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit." Matthew 7:18. The meaning is clear. What is within determines what is expressed. This is not limited to actions. It includes tone, energy, posture, and presence. When your internal state begins to shift, your external expression follows. And when your expression changes, the experience of interacting with you also changes. This is not a theory, it is observable. In the program, one man shared how he had spent years trying to get his wife to communicate differently. He had read books, attended sessions, and even memorized phrases that he believed would improve their conversations, yet nothing seemed to stick. Everything changed when he stopped focusing on what she needed to do and began applying what he had learned internally. He noticed his own expectations. He recognized his defensive patterns. He became aware of the tone he carried before conversations even began. And then he practiced something different. Not outwardly at first, but inwardly. He began entering conversations without the assumption that they would turn into conflict. He listened without preparing a response. He remained present even when the discussion felt uncomfortable. At first, nothing dramatic happened. But over time, something subtle shifted. His wife began to respond differently, not because she had been instructed to, but because the interaction itself no longer felt the same. The tension that once existed before a word was spoken began to dissolve. And that is the key. You are not only influencing what is said, you are influencing what is felt. The unseen exchange. Every interaction carries more than words. It carries presence, it carries expectation, it carries the emotional state from which those words are spoken. This is why two people can say the same thing and receive completely different responses. The difference is not always in the words themselves, but in what is carried behind them. Scripture speaks to this in a way that is often overlooked. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Matthew 12:34. The emphasis is not on the mouth, but on the heart. What is expressed outwardly is a reflection of what is held inwardly. When your inner conversation changes, your outward communication changes, even if the words remain the same. There is less urgency to prove a point, less pressure to control the outcome, less tension in how you engage. And this changes how the other person experiences you, not because you are trying to change them, but because you are no longer showing up the same way. A conversation that shifted everything. During one session, a woman shared an experience that captured this transformation clearly. She described a moment where a familiar argument began to surface. The topic was not new. The pattern was well established. She could almost predict how the conversation would unfold. But this time, she did something different. She paused, not outwardly but inwardly. She noticed the feeling rising. She recognized the thought forming. And instead of following it, she returned to what she had been practicing. She chose to remain present. She listened without interrupting. She responded without defensiveness. She allowed space where she would have previously filled it with reaction. And then something unexpected happened. Her partner paused. That had never happened before. The conversation slowed. The tension softened. The usual escalation did not occur. It was not a perfect interaction. It did not resolve everything. But it was different. And that difference mattered, because it showed her something she had not seen before. Her participation influenced the experience, not by force, but by presence. Why others begin to respond differently. There is a natural question that arises at this stage. Why does this work? From a psychological perspective, human interaction is deeply responsive. We are constantly adjusting to one another, often unconsciously. Tone influences tone. Energy influences energy. Presence influences presence. From a spiritual perspective, the principle is even clearer. With the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Luke 6:38. This is not limited to material exchange. It reflects the nature of interaction itself. What you bring into a moment shapes what returns to you. Not always immediately, not always perfectly, but consistently over time. When you shift from defensiveness to openness, the interaction changes. When you move from assumption to presence, the conversation changes. When you let go of the need to control, space opens for something new to emerge. This does not mean the other person transforms instantly, but it does mean the dynamic cannot remain exactly the same. Letting go of control, gaining influence. One of the most significant shifts at this stage is the release of control. You begin to realize that your role is not to force change in another person, but to remain aligned within yourself. This is not passive, it is intentional. It requires awareness, consistency, and trust in the process. Jesus demonstrated this repeatedly. He did not force responses, he did not control outcomes, yet his presence carried influence. People responded not because they were compelled, but because something within them was stirred. This is the same principle at work in your relationships. When you show up differently, you create the conditions for a different experience, not by demanding it, but by embodying it. And there is a quiet confidence that begins to develop in this process. You are no longer dependent on the other person to determine how you feel. You are no longer reacting to every shift in behavior. You are grounded in a way that allows you to remain steady, even when the moment is uncertain. This steadiness is not only felt by you, it is felt by them when change feels slow. There will be moments when the external response does not immediately reflect your internal shift, moments where it seems as though nothing has changed. This is where patience becomes essential, because transformation, especially in relationships, unfolds over time. Galatians reminds us, whatever one sows, that will he also reap. Galatians 6:7. Sowing is not immediate harvesting. It is a process. It requires consistency. It requires trust. Each moment you show up differently is a seed. Each pause, each awareness, each aligned response contributes to something that is being formed, even if it is not yet visible. And over time, those seeds produce fruit, not because you forced it, but because you remained consistent. The shift that changes everything. As this chapter comes to a close, there is a truth that deserves your full attention. You do not change your relationship by changing the other person. You change your relationship by changing how you show up within it. And when that shift becomes consistent, something remarkable happens. The relationship begins to feel different, not because everything is perfect, but because the foundation has changed. You are no longer reacting unconsciously. You are participating intentionally. You are no longer waiting for change. You are embodying it. And in that embodiment, others begin to feel something they may not be able to explain. A difference, a shift, a presence that was not there before. And that is where transformation becomes shared. Chapter 8. Staying free when the old pattern calls you back. The subtle return of the familiar. There's a stage in every transformation that is rarely spoken about, yet deeply experienced. It is not the beginning, where everything feels unclear, nor is it the breakthrough, where everything feels possible. It is the space that follows progress, the place where you have seen, practiced, and even experienced change. Yet something familiar begins to call you back. It does not arrive loudly. It does not announce itself as a problem. It appears quietly, almost convincingly, as a thought, a feeling, or a subtle shift in perception that feels justified. You may find yourself thinking, maybe nothing has really changed, or feeling a familiar tension rise in a moment that once felt lighter. And before you realize it, the old pattern is present again, not because you have lost the progress, but because what has been practiced for years does not disappear in a few moments of awareness. This is where many people misunderstand the journey. They assume that once they have experienced clarity, they should no longer encounter the old way of thinking or feeling. And when it returns, they interpret it as failure. But this is not a failure. This is refinement, the principle of continuity. Scripture offers a powerful insight into this stage of transformation. Jesus speaks with clarity when he says, "No one who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God." Luke 9:62. This is not a statement of rejection, but a description of focus. Transformation requires continuity, not perfection, but direction. To look back is not simply to remember the past, but to re-engage with it in a way that pulls you out of alignment. It is to return unconsciously to what you have already seen through. And this is where awareness becomes essential. Because the old pattern does not return as something obvious. It returns as something familiar. And familiarity can feel like truth if it is not recognized. A conversation that revealed the pattern. During one of our sessions, a man shared an experience that captured this moment with clarity. He had been practicing everything we had discussed, pausing, noticing, returning to a different inner conversation. And for a period of time, he felt a genuine shift. Conversations were lighter, tension had decreased, connection felt more accessible. But then something happened. A small disagreement surfaced. Nothing significant, nothing unusual. Yet in that moment, he felt something rise within him that he had not felt in weeks. Frustration. And almost immediately, a familiar thought followed. Here we go again. That single thought carried weight, not because of the moment itself, but because of what it represented. It was not describing the situation, it was reconnecting him to a pattern. And in that instant, he felt himself being pulled back into a way of responding that he had already begun to move beyond. But this time, something was different. He noticed it, not after the reaction, but within it. And in that awareness, he paused. He did not suppress the feeling. He did not force himself to respond differently. He simply recognized what was happening. And then he made a choice, not to follow the pattern, but to return to what he had been practicing. That moment did not eliminate the feeling, but it changed his relationship to it. And that is where freedom is sustained, the nature of the old self. The Apostle Paul describes this process in a way that brings clarity to what you are experiencing. He writes, "Put off your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind." Ephesians 4:22-23. Notice the language, put off. This is not something that happens once. It is something that is done repeatedly. Because the old self is not a person you become again. It is a pattern that you reconnect with if you are not aware. And this is why the work continues, not because you are starting over, but because you are strengthening what is new. Every time you recognize the old pattern and choose not to follow it, you are reinforcing a new way of being. Every time you return to awareness rather than reaction, you deepen your alignment. This is how freedom is maintained. The role of attention. What you give your attention to determines what you experience. This principle remains consistent throughout your journey. When attention drifts back to old interpretations, old conclusions, and old emotional patterns, those experiences begin to feel present again. Not because they have power on their own, but because attention gives them life. Jesus expressed this principle in a way that is both simple and profound. The lamp of the body is the eye. If therefore your eye is single, your whole body will be full of light. Matthew 6:22. To have a single eye is to maintain focused attention, not divided between what you have seen and what you have already moved beyond, not pulled between awareness and unconscious reaction, but steady, clear, present. This does not mean you never notice old thoughts or feelings. It means you do not dwell in them. You see them and you return. Returning without resistance. There is an important distinction to understand at this stage. Returning is not the same as resisting. When an old thought arises, the instinct may be to push it away, to reject it, or to fight against it. But resistance often gives it more attention, more energy, and more persistence. Instead, what you are learning is a different approach. You notice, you acknowledge, and you return, not forcefully, not with frustration, but with clarity. You recognize that the thought is familiar, but not authoritative. The feeling is present, but not defining. The pattern is available, but not necessary. And in that recognition, you allow it to pass without attaching to it. This is what Paul describes when he says, "Take every thought captive." 2 Corinthians 10:5. It is not about controlling thoughts through force. It is about seeing them clearly and choosing which ones to align with. This is a practice, and like every practice, it becomes more natural with repetition. When progress feels fragile, there may be moments when it feels as though your progress is fragile. Moments where a single experience seems to undo what you have been building. Moments where you question whether the change is real. But what you are experiencing is not fragility, it is sensitivity. You are more aware now, you notice more, you recognize patterns sooner. And because of that, what once went unnoticed now feels more present. This is not a step backward, it is a sign of growth. Because you cannot change what you do not see. And now you are seeing the stability of a new way of being. Over time, something begins to stabilize within you. The old patterns may still appear, but they no longer carry the same weight. They no longer define your response. They no longer determine your experience. You begin to feel a steadiness that was not there before. Not because everything is perfect, but because you are no longer easily pulled. This is what James refers to when he speaks of becoming steadfast. James 1:3. It is the development of consistency, the ability to remain aligned even when the moment feels uncertain. And this steadiness is not forced, it is practiced, built through repetition, strengthened through awareness, sustained through returning, the freedom you now carry. As this chapter comes to a close, there is a truth that deserves your attention. Freedom is not the absence of old patterns, and it is the ability to no longer be governed by them. You may still notice familiar thoughts. You may still feel familiar emotions, but they no longer define you. They no longer control you. Because you have learned something greater. You have learned to see, you have learned to return, you have learned to remain, and in that you carry something that cannot be taken from you. Not because it was given externally, but because it was cultivated within. This is what it means to stay free. Not by force or not by perfection, but by awareness and by the quiet, consistent choice to remain aligned with what you now know. Chapter 9. The relationship reflects what you hold, the mirror you cannot escape. There comes a moment in this journey where a realization settles in with unmistakable clarity. It is not dramatic or overwhelming, yet it carries a quiet weight that changes how you see everything that unfolds in your relationship. What you are experiencing is not separate from you. It is reflecting you, not in the surface level sense of blame or fault, but in a deeper, more precise way. The tone of your interactions, the patterns that repeat, the emotional responses that seem to arise without invitation, all of it is connected to what is being held within your awareness. This can feel confronting at first because it removes the familiar distance that allows you to point outward and explain why things are the way they are. It challenges the belief that change must begin somewhere else, with someone else, at another time. But what it offers in return is something far more valuable. It places the point of transformation back within your reach, seeing beyond appearances. Scripture has long pointed to this principle, though it is often overlooked in its simplicity. In Proverbs it is written, "As a man thinks in his heart, so is he." Proverbs 23:7. This is not merely a statement about identity. It is a statement about experience. What is held internally becomes expressed externally, not always immediately, and not always in a direct or obvious way, but consistently over time. This is why two people can be in the same situation and experience it entirely differently. It is not the circumstance that determines the experience. It is the meaning assigned to it, the perception carried into it, and the state from which it is interpreted. In relationships, this becomes even more pronounced, because what is held within one person does not remain contained. It influences tone, language, posture, timing, and response. It shapes the energy of the interaction long before words are spoken, and that energy is received often without awareness. A shift in one, a change in both. During a conversation with a woman navigating a strained marriage, this principle became evident in a way that was both subtle and powerful. She described feeling consistently dismissed, as though her words carried little weight in the conversations she had with her husband. "I explained myself clearly," she said, "but it's like he doesn't hear me." As we explored this further, it became clear that her focus was not on what she was expressing, but on how it was being received. Her attention was anchored in the expectation of dismissal, and over time that expectation had become familiar. It shaped how she spoke, carefully, defensively, with an underlying tension that anticipated being misunderstood. It influenced how she listened, quickly, interpreting responses as confirmation of what she already believed. Without realizing it, she was participating in the very pattern she wanted to change, not because she was doing something wrong, but because she was holding something that continued to be expressed. As she began to shift her attention, something unexpected happened. She did not start by changing her words. She began by changing her expectations. She allowed herself to consider a different possibility, that she could be heard, that her words could land, that the conversation could move differently. At first, this felt unfamiliar, even uncertain, but she practiced returning to that perspective before and during her interactions, and gradually the tone began to change. Not dramatically, not instantly, but noticeably. Her voice softened and her timing adjusted. Her responses became less reactive. And in response to that shift, her husband began to engage differently, not because he had been instructed to, but because something in the dynamic had changed. This is how reflection works. It does not require control, it requires alignment. The law of correspondence. This principle is echoed in the teachings of Jesus when he says, "Why do you see the speck in your brother's eye, but do not notice the plank in your own eye?" Matthew 7:3. This is not a call to self-criticism, but to awareness. What you notice is often connected to what you carry, not always in the same form, but in the same pattern. When attention is directed outward without reflection, it reinforces the belief that the source of the experience lies elsewhere. But when attention is brought inward with clarity, it reveals the connection between what is held and what is seen. This is not about assigning blame, it is about recognizing influence, because influence is where change becomes possible. The emotional signature you bring. Every interaction carries more than words. It carries an emotional signature, a subtle, often unspoken layer of communication that conveys what you are feeling, expecting, and assuming beneath the surface. This is why two people can say the same words and create entirely different experiences. Because the words are not the only message being received. What you feel is being communicated. whether you intend it or not. And this is where the work deepens. Because transformation is no longer about choosing better words. It is about becoming aware of what those words are carrying. When the emotional signature shifts, the interaction shifts. When expectations change, responses change. Not through force, but through alignment, breaking the illusion of separation. One of the most persistent beliefs in strained relationships is the idea of separation. The sense that I am here and they are there, and that the distance between those 2 points is the problem. But what this journey reveals is that the distance is not only external, it is internal. It is created and maintained through perception, interpretation, and expectation. When that internal distance begins to close, when understanding replaces assumption, when awareness replaces reaction, the external dynamic begins to shift as well. This is why Paul writes, "Be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Romans 12:2. The transformation he speaks of is not limited to personal identity. It extends into every area of life, including relationships. Because the mind is not isolated, it is expressive. What is renewed within is reflected without. When the reflection feels uncomfortable, there may be moments when what you see in your relationship feels uncomfortable to acknowledge. Moments where the reflection reveals something you would rather not see. This is natural, because awareness often brings clarity before it brings ease. But it is in that clarity that change becomes possible. When you see the pattern without resistance, without judgment, and without avoidance, you create space for something new to emerge, not by force, but by understanding. And understanding changes how you engage. The quiet power of alignment. As you continue this journey, you begin to recognize that transformation is not about managing the other person. It is about aligning within yourself. This alignment is not rigid. It is not forced. It is a steady return to what you have seen to be true, to the awareness that your experience is connected to what you hold, to the recognition that your response influences the dynamic, to the understanding that change does not require control. It requires consistency, and in that consistency, something begins to stabilize. The interactions feel different, the tension softens, the connection becomes more accessible. Not because everything is perfect, but because something within you has shifted. The relationship as a living reflection. By now, it has become clear that your relationship is not a fixed structure. It is a living reflection, responsive, adaptive, and influenced by what is brought into it. This does not mean that every moment will align immediately with what you are practicing. But it does mean that what you are practicing matters. It shapes the direction. It influences the tone. It determines the trajectory. And over time, that influence becomes visible. What you now carry forward. As this chapter comes to a close, there is a simple yet profound truth to carry with you. Your relationship reflects what you hold. Not perfectly, not instantly, but consistently. And within that reflection is an opportunity to see more clearly, to align more intentionally, to respond more consciously, not by changing everything at once, but by recognizing that what you bring into the relationship is not separate from what you experience within it. And as that recognition deepens, so does your ability to shape what unfolds, not through control, but through awareness. And in that awareness, you begin to experience something that once felt distant, and a relationship that no longer feels like something happening to you, but something is evolving with you. Chapter 10. Becoming the environment where love grows. The shift from effort to atmosphere. There is a quiet but profound transition that takes place as this journey reaches its deeper stages. It is the movement away from trying to make love work, toward becoming the space where love naturally expresses itself. In the beginning, much of the effort is directed toward doing, finding the right words, choosing better responses, managing reactions, and attempting to correct what feels broken. This stage is necessary because it brings awareness to patterns that once operated without question. It interrupts the automatic and introduces intention. But over time, something begins to change. The focus shifts from action to presence, from effort to atmosphere. You begin to recognize that love is not sustained by constant correction, but by the environment in which it is allowed to exist. And that environment is not external. It is created within you. This realization changes the entire approach, because you are no longer trying to produce a connection through effort. You are cultivating a state in which connection becomes natural. The ground where seeds take root. Scripture offers a powerful metaphor for this understanding through Jesus' words in the parable of the sower. The seed is the word, but the condition of the soil determines how it grows. Luke 8:11-15. The emphasis is not on the seed, it is on the soil. The same word, the same intention, the same expression can produce different outcomes depending on the condition in which it is received. In relationships, this principle becomes unmistakably clear. Words spoken in tension often fail to land. Words spoken in calmness often open space. Words spoken in expectation can feel heavy. Words spoken in the presence can feel inviting. The difference is not always in what is said, it is in the environment in which it is expressed. And that environment is shaped by what is held within. When your internal state is unsettled, your communication carries that unrest. When your awareness is steady, your communication reflects that steadiness. This is the soil, and as you begin to tend to it, the outcomes begin to change. A conversation that revealed the shift. In one of our sessions, a woman shared something that marked a turning point in her experience. She described a recent interaction with her spouse that, under previous circumstances, would have led to frustration and withdrawal. He said something that would normally trigger me, she explained, and I felt it. I felt that familiar reaction start to rise. But this time, she did not follow it. She noticed it. And instead of trying to correct him, defend herself, or redirect the conversation, she returned to what she had been practicing, remaining present, allowing the moment to unfold without immediately assigning meaning to it. I didn't rush to respond, she said. I just stayed with myself. What followed surprised her. The conversation did not escalate. It did not spiral into misunderstanding. It softened, not because she had said something different, but because she had brought something different into the interaction. Her presence had changed the environment, and within that environment, a different response became possible. This is the shift, not controlling the moment, but influencing it through what you carry. The indwelling source of love. As this understanding deepens, it becomes clear that love is not something you must continuously generate. It is something you allow to flow through you when resistance is no longer guiding your response. The Apostle Paul expresses this beautifully when he writes, "The love of God has been poured out within our hearts through the Holy Spirit." Romans 5:5. This is not a distant or abstract idea. It is a direct statement about availability. Love is not absent. It is present, but it is often overshadowed by patterns of fear, defense, expectation, and interpretation that shape how you engage. When those patterns begin to loosen, what has always been present becomes more accessible. Not because you have created it, but because you have allowed it. Presence as the new language. There comes a point where presence begins to communicate more than words ever could. The way you listen, the way you respond, the way you hold space in a conversation begins to carry meaning beyond what is spoken. This is why moments of genuine connection often feel effortless, because they are not constructed, they are allowed. When you are fully present, you are not reacting to the past or anticipating the future. You are engaging with what is in front of you without distortion. And in that clarity, your response becomes more aligned, more precise, more effective. This is not about perfection. It is about congruence, the alignment between what you feel, what you intend and what you express. And that alignment creates trust, not only in the other person, but within yourself. The transformation of effort. As this becomes more natural, effort begins to take on a different role. It is no longer about forcing change or managing every detail of the interaction. It becomes the quiet discipline of returning to awareness when you drift. There will still be moments where old patterns attempt to re-emerge, moments when the familiar pull toward reaction, defense, or withdrawal arises. But now, you recognize it sooner, and you return more quickly, not with frustration, but with clarity, because you understand that the environment you create matters more than any single moment. And that environment is shaped continuously, not occasionally. The fruit of a cultivated environment. Over time, the results of this shift become visible. Conversations feel less strained, silence feels less heavy, connection feels more accessible. Not because every issue has been resolved, but because the way you engage with those issues has changed. The relationship begins to feel less like something you are trying to fix and more like something that is evolving. This is what Paul refers to when he speaks of the fruit of the Spirit, Galatians 5:22-23. These qualities, love, peace, patience, kindness, are not produced through effort alone. They are expressed naturally when the internal environment supports them. And as that environment stabilizes, those qualities become more consistent. Not as something you perform, but as something you embody. When the environment is tested, there will be moments when this environment is challenged, situations that test your awareness, interactions that feel more difficult, and circumstances that seem to invite a return to old patterns. These moments are not interruptions. They are opportunities, not to prove anything, but to practice what has been learned, to remain present when it would be easier to react, to stay aligned when it would be familiar to withdraw, to continue cultivating the environment that allows something different to emerge. This is where transformation becomes integrated, not in the absence of challenge, but in the way you meet it, the relationship you now lead. As this chapter comes to a close, it becomes clear that the relationship you experience is deeply influenced by the environment you create within yourself. You are no longer approaching it as something that must be managed from the outside. You are leading it from within, not through control, but through presence, not through effort alone, but through alignment. And in that leadership, something begins to take root. A sense of stability, a depth of connection, a quiet confidence that the relationship is no longer dependent on constant correction, but supported by a consistent environment where love can grow. This is not a final destination. It is a new way of being, one that continues to unfold, deepen, and expand as you remain grounded in what you now understand. And as you carry this forward, you realize something that once felt uncertain. Love was never something you had to force into existence. It was always something waiting to be expressed through the environment you choose to become.